Hello and welcome to IP Study video lectures. Today we are going to discuss chapter number 4 of grade 7 social science. The chapter name is The Mughal Empire. In our previous chapter we discussed about the Delhi Sultanate, how 5 different dynasties ruled regions of Delhi and the neighboring regions for about 350 years. Here in Mughal dynasty we see that the whole dynasty rules for about 350 years. The first 6 Mughal emperors, also known as the Great Mughals, were indeed very powerful, whereas the later Mughals are not considered as powerful. But because their administration was strong, because they had different military strategies, diplomatic relations with other kings, we see that they were able to rule for such a long time period. And yes, this is why they have a huge impact on India's history, on India's, you can say, culture, architecture and so on. So let us discuss who the Mughals were. Now Mughals are considered the descendants of 2 invaders who had come to India from Afghanistan. One is Genghis Khan and the other one is Taimur. So from their father's side, they are considered as the descendants of Genghis Khan, and from their mother's side, they are considered as the descendants of Taimur. Now both of these were very ruthless rulers in their own regard, who tried to attack India many times. The word Mughal comes from the word Mongolians itself. So they preferred to be considered as the descendants of the Mongols. Now the first ruler was Babur. Babur fought the battle of Panipat against Ibrahim Lodi, where he defeated Ibrahim Lodi, and that is how we see that the Delhi Sultanate came to an end. And after defeating Ibrahim Lodi, he attacked many other regional kings of that region. One of the most important names where he had to really fight a very, you can say, difficult battle was against Rana Sanga of Mewar. But yes, in 1527, in the battle of Khanwa, where they both met, Rana Sanga was defeated and Babur was able to expand his empire. After this victory, we see that a very important region of central India was under his control. Later on, we also see that he defeated the combined forces of Bengal and Bihar, and now we can see a large area of northern India was under his control. And all this Babur was able to achieve within 4 years before he died in 1530. His book Tazk-e-Babari, that is his autobiography, gives us an account of these battles and his life. Now Babur wanted his son Humayun to take over after him. Humayun was his eldest son, and Humayun was indeed successful to capture some more areas, where he was able to capture Gujarat and Malwa. But Humayun faced many tough battles against Sher Shah Suri, whom he actually defeated in the battle of Chunar. But later on we see that Sher Shah Suri came back and defeated Humayun in the battles of Chausa and Kanauj. Due to his defeat in these battles, Humayun was forced to escape to Iran, where he lived for about 15 years of his life. Here he was planning to take over the empire. He took help of Safavid Shah, and with his help he was able to plan back an attack, and he actually took over Delhi in 1555. But shortly after that, Humayun passes away. Let's discuss the Sur Empire. Now the Sur Empire actually ruled for only about 15 years, but it had a great impact on Indian history. It was founded by Sher Shah Suri, who was considered as a very brave ruler, and he got his name Sher Shah because it is believed that he killed a tiger. Now Sher Shah was not only brave, he was also a very good administrator. His empire extended from Bengal to the Indus River. First, he made a lot of efforts to improve trade and commerce during his time. He wanted to improve the transportation and communication networks. For this, he built the Grand Trunk Road, which is considered as one of the oldest and longest roads in not just India but Asia. He also set up sarais or inns which were meant for the travelers. Now there were many people who used to travel from one place to another, whether it was for pilgrims or for traders. So many people used to travel, and these sarais were the rest places for these travelers. He also wanted to promote trade and commerce, as we discussed before. For this, he standardized the currency. Weights and measures were also standardized so that people could trade efficiently. He launched coins made up of gold, silver and copper. The rupaya, which is the modern day currency of India, was also introduced during his time period. So he was able to maintain a very good law and order. He did a lot of reforms for stabilizing the economy and took steps for the welfare of people. He also introduced a document called Patta, which included the details of the peasants. Details like what kind of crops are cultivated and the amount each peasant had to pay in taxes. So there was more transparency with this step. The peasants knew exactly what amount they had to pay as taxes. He was very mindful of the interest of the peasants. He did not want them to be cheated by the revenue collectors. So all in all, we can say that he was a very good administrator, and all this he was able to achieve within 5 years, because he died in 1545, and later on his successors were not as strong as him, were not as able as him, and that is why we see that by 1555 the Suri dynasty comes to an end, where Humayun is able to defeat them and get the empire back. But yes, because these steps taken by Sher Shah Suri or the Suri dynasty were so important, the things that he did for the administration, the things that he did to improve the revenue collection, they were actually taken forward by the Mughals. They continued the policies which were started by him. Now let's discuss about the next few Mughal rulers, that included Akbar and his successors. Now, after the death of Humayun, we see that Akbar came to power. Akbar was only 13 years of age when he became the emperor, and that is why we see that his mother and Bairam Khan takes the in charge of the administration until Akbar reaches 18 years of age, right? So because Akbar was very young, we see that Bairam Khan ruled the empire on his behalf. Now, after Humayun's death, we see that some of the relatives of Sher Shah Suri, his nephews, wanted to take the empire back. Adil Shah and Sikandar Shah wanted to take the empire back, and that is why they appoint Hemu, who is a very brave and a very, we can say, able general. They wanted to capture Delhi and Agra back. But Bairam Khan and Akbar led the forces, and they defeated them in the second battle of Panipat in 1556. So the first battle of Panipat was fought between Babur and Ibrahim Lodi, where we see that the Mughal Empire is established after this battle, and here to consolidate the Mughal Empire, the second battle of Panipat is fought between Babur's grandson, that is Akbar, to make sure that the empire continues for a long time. So after consolidating his empire against the Suri dynasty, we see that Akbar launches many battles for the expansion of the Mughal Empire. He launches battles against Adil Shah Suri and the kingdoms of Malwa and Gondwana. There were some revolts against the empire. These revolts were from his half-brother and the Uzbeks, but he was able to control these revolts as well. And later on we see that many other campaigns are launched to annex regions in Rajasthan, in Gujarat, Bihar, Bengal and some regions of Deccan as well. Remember, Deccan was a very difficult region to conquer for many of the northern rulers, but we see that many rulers were very ambitious to expand their empire to these regions. And some of these regions like Ahmednagar, like Golconda were actually captured by Akbar. So we see that he kept these campaigns on and was able to control many regions of Gujarat, Bihar, Bengal, and also reduce the power of the Afghans who kept on attacking and wanted to capture the regions of Indian subcontinent. So largely we can see that Akbar was able to maintain a large empire but also a very stable empire. And to make sure that he was able to maintain a stable empire, he used a diplomatic policy, especially to deal with the Rajput kings. The Rajput kings were very brave. They kept on attacking the Mughal empire, and to make sure that he can maintain his empire, he wanted to form a diplomatic alliance with them. So instead of keep on fighting with these empires, he made them his allies. Allies means those kingdoms who are working with you, who are kind of your friend instead of your enemy. So how did he pursue this policy? He did that with marrying daughters of the Rajput kingdoms. So by marrying the daughters of the Rajput kingdoms, he maintained a personal relationship with them. And even if he defeated some of the kingdoms, he did not humiliate the kings of these kingdoms. In fact, he let them rule their kingdoms by accepting the overlordship of Akbar, right? So the overlordship means that the ultimate power is with the Mughal emperor, but these kingdoms could rule over themselves. And not only rule, but they could also collect taxes. These were called as Watan Jagirs. These Watan Jagirs means they had the right to collect the revenue from the lands which were in these kingdoms, and Akbar allowed these Rajput kings to collect these revenue and run their kingdoms smoothly. So we see that it is not only the military prowess but also the diplomatic relations which help the Mughal empire to maintain a very stable empire under Akbar. Now, one Rajput ruler who did not accept Akbar's overlordship was Rana Pratap or Maharana Pratap. He opposed Akbar from the beginning, and throughout his life he met Akbar in many famous battles. One such famous battle was of Haldi Ghati. We see that throughout his lifespan, he did not surrender against the Mughal Empire. He died in an accident but never surrendered in his life. Now, one of the important aspects of Akbar's policies is his religious policy. This is what has made Akbar great. This is why many historians have called him great. Now, he abolished the pilgrimage tax in 1563 CE. He also abolished the jizya, which was a religious tax on the Hindus. Now, jizya tax is considered controversial because many Muslim rulers have been accused to impose this tax on the non-Muslims. But Akbar did not want that he should interfere with the religion of his subjects. Majority of them were Hindus, and he did not want the Hindus to pay this tax. He was also against the policy of forceful conversion of prisoners into Islam. So many a times we see that after defeating the soldiers of the other kingdom, they were forcefully converted into Islam. But Akbar discouraged that practice. In fact, Akbar is known for his secular policies where he treats all religions equally. The philosophy of Deen-e-Ilahi included the learnings from the different religions. He wanted a universal religion for his subjects where they could get the good learnings of all religions. But Akbar did not force anyone to adopt Deen-e-Ilahi. It was only through the free will that the ministers or other people followed this religious policy. He also talked about Sulai Kul. This means religious tolerance. It literally means universal peace, and that shows his tolerance towards other religious ideologies. Akbar even got many holy books of Hindus translated into Persian. So that shows his respect toward the holy books of Hindus. He in fact encouraged many Hindus to build temples. Now Akbar was very curious about other religions. He wanted to know what are the teachings of the other religions. For this he established the Ibadat Khana, or the hall of worship. This was located in Fatehpur Sikri, a city built by him. Here he invited different scholars to have debates and discussions about different religious ideas. And it was after these discussions that he came up with Deen-e-Ilahi. Now let us discuss about Jahangir. Jahangir was the third son of Akbar and the fourth Mughal emperor. Now Jahangir adopted some of the policies of his father, and that is why he was able to establish a stable empire like him. He launched a military campaign against Rana Amar Singh, the son of Maharana Pratap. Amar Singh was also a very brave ruler, and he resisted many of the attacks by the Mughals. Attacks happened in 1606, 1608, 1609, but these expeditions proved indecisive. There was no clear winner in these conflicts. It was only when a campaign was led by Prince Khurram, later known as Shah Jahan, that Amar Singh finally submitted to the Mughal forces. But here also we see that Jahangir did not humiliate him. In fact, just like his father, he wanted to maintain diplomatic relations. So the terms were very fair to the Mewars. So they accepted Mughals at their overlordships, but Mughals did not shame them or insult them after this victory. And this is how we see that the long struggle between the Mewars and the Mughals came to an end. Now Mughals also faced several difficult campaigns in the Deccan. As we discussed before, Deccan was a difficult region to conquer for a northern ruler, and even though Jahangir tried both military force and diplomacy, he was also unable to take control of a large region in the Deccan region. Now during Akbar's time, we see that some European traders arrived in India. These were William Hawkins and Sir Thomas Raw. William Hawkins wanted permission to open up a factory, an English factory at Surat, whereas Thomas Raw wanted permission to start a port in Surat. These permissions were granted by Jahangir, and this was a very defining moment in Indian history, because we see a century later that while Britishers came for the purpose of trade, they actually became the masters of the land. They became the colonial power in India. Now Noor Jahan was the famous wife of Jahangir. It is said that she was the real power behind the throne. So she had a lot of say in how the administration was run. And we see that after the death of Jahangir, Noor Jahan retired from the political life. During his lifetime, she had a very important impact on the empire. After Jahangir's death, we see that Prince Khurram or Shah Jahan came to power. Shah Jahan is considered as one of the greatest rulers of Mughal dynasty. During his time, we see that different military campaigns are launched to extend the empire. Also, advancement in art, literature, and architecture was very evident during his time. Taj Mahal was created during his time, and not just Taj Mahal, we see Red Fort and some other structures in Delhi were also built. Now Shah Jahan launched some successful campaigns. He had revolts from an Afghan noble, Khan Jahan Lodi, but this revolt was suppressed. He also annexed Ahmednagar. He defeated the Bundelas and captured Orcha region. So we see a lot of expansion happened during the time of Shah Jahan as well. The Mughals also faced some setbacks under the rule of Shah Jahan. He was not able to capture Balkh region from Uzbeks and also lost Kandahar region from the Safavids. So these were some of the setbacks under his time period. But largely we see that he was able to maintain a very stable empire. Now after the death of Shah Jahan, we see that there was a war of succession. 4 of his sons, Aurangzeb, Dara Shikoh, Murad and Shuja, wanted to be on the throne. But it was Aurangzeb who defeated his 3 brothers to sit on the throne, even though Shah Jahan wanted Dara Shikoh to be his successor. Now Aurangzeb ruled from the time period of 1658 to 1707, so almost 50 years, just like his great-grandfather Akbar. But we see that some of the policies that Aurangzeb adopted were opposite to that of Akbar. The primary policy was that of religious conversion and imposition of jizya tax. We see that Aurangzeb was not as secular as Akbar. In fact, he used religion as a tool to rule over his empire. Now, let's discuss more about Aurangzeb. So he won the battle of succession, and after winning the battle of succession, he came to power. During his time, we see that there was territorial expansion. So he was a very able warrior and he was able to capture many regions. In fact, under his rule, we see that the Mughal Empire was at its peak. Aurangzeb was very ambitious and he wanted to fulfill his ambition of ruling over the entire subcontinent. And this is why for him, it was very important to take control of the Deccan region. And this is why he spent about 26 years of his life in his Deccan campaign. So during the time of Aurangzeb, we also see that there were some regional powers that were rising. Some of these were the Maratha powers, the Sikhs and the Jats. Now, because these powers were rising, there was constant conflict and constant threat to the Mughal Empire. And also the fact that Aurangzeb himself spent a lot of time and the wealth of his empire to capture the regions of Deccan, it became more and more difficult for Aurangzeb to consolidate his empire. So despite all his efforts, we say that Aurangzeb was not able to stop the decline of the Mughal Empire. After his death, there was a war of succession, and the later Mughals that came after him were not as strong. Even though Aurangzeb died in 1707 and officially the Mughal Empire came to an end in 1857, 150 years later, but we see that there were several kings that came and went during this time, and the region of the Mughal Empire became less and less, right? And this is why we say that the first 6 Mughals were actually considered as the great Mughals, whereas the kings who came after Aurangzeb were not as strong. And one of the reasons behind that was Aurangzeb's policies as well, where his religious policies made him unpopular with the masses, and his military campaigns actually weakened the empire. Alright, now let us move towards the next topic, that is the Mughal administration. Now the Mughal court is considered as quite ceremonial in nature, just like the case of Delhi Sultanate. Why ceremonial? Because here also we see that the ultimate power lies in the hands of the king, and the ministers are just there to do the day-to-day work. Persian is considered as the language of the culture, and Urdu is considered as a language of administration. It simply means that Urdu was the official language, the language of the court. There was a central administration. Here we see that the entire kingdom was divided into provinces called subhas. These subhas were 15 in number during Akbar's time, but later on, as the empire increased, the number of subhas went up to 21. Now, these subhas were further divided into sarkars. These sarkars were divided into parganas, and these parganas were divided into grams or villages. So, we see that even though administration was central in nature, for better administration, they were divided into different units so that they could be ruled efficiently. The position of the Prime Minister was known as the Wazir. The Diwan was the head of the revenue department. Now, the territory of the empire were divided into three main kinds of lands. These were the Khalisas, which meant the town lands, then the Jagirs. These were the land that were granted to nobles. The nobles could collect taxes from the Jagirs assigned to them. And then there was Inam. This Inam was granted to people who had done some distinguished work in religious matters or other learned men of the time. Now, Mir Bakshi was another important position in the administration. The Mir Bakshi looked after the military department. And they also had a position of Khanai Saman, which looked after the royal household. So everything that was required by the royal family was taken care of by this official. Now, as far as the judicial officials were concerned, Qazis were appointed for this purpose. They not only made sure that justice was delivered, they also gave advice to the emperor on several matters. Qazi ul Quzat was the chief judge among them. Now let's discuss about the provincial administration. At the provincial levels, that is the subhas, we see that the subadar is in charge. Now, subadar is there not only for the welfare of people but also the army. Subadar is responsible for making sure that the different needs of the people are met. This includes building up of different sarais for travelers, building up of wells, gardens, rest houses, roads, etc. The revenue department was headed by the Diwan, who maintained accounts of revenue and salaries. Now, these subhas were further divided into districts or sarkars. Now, these sarkars had two important officials. One was Fauzdars and another was Amal Gujars. Now, the Fauzdar was responsible for maintaining law and order. This law and order was important because many traders used to come and the security of traders and other travelers rested with the Fauzdars. Fauzdars also assisted the Amal Gujars in collecting the revenue from the sarkar. Now, these sarkars also had a thanedar. These thanedars were responsible for maintaining law and order and also provided military service military supplies as and when required. Now, these sarkars were also further divided into parganas, and these parganas were further divided into grams or villages. At these positions also there were different officials to maintain law and order and to collect revenue from the people. In the parganas there were shikdars and amils for this purpose, whereas in the villages there were muqaddam and patwari for the purpose of collecting revenue. Now let's discuss about the mansabdari system, which is important to understand the military administration under the Mughals. Now, this was introduced by Akbar, where mansab means a rank or a position. A mansabdar therefore means a person who holds this position or rank. So, under this what happened was, these ranks were based on two important elements, Zat and Sawar. Zat means the salary of the mansabdar, whereas Sawar means the number of cavalrymen under each mansabdar. Each cavalryman was allowed to have 2 horses. Now, the salary of the mansabdar was paid in cash, and this was based on the fact on what amount was collected as revenue from the mansab assigned to that mansabdar. From this salary, not only the Mansabdar used to pay for his own household expenses but also pay the salary of the soldiers. So the rank of the Mansabdar was not hereditary, which means that the son of the Mansabdar will not automatically become a Mansabdar. It was the, you can say, the judgment of the king on who will become the Mansabdar. This was generally given to very loyal people in the court. Now let us move to our next topic, agriculture in Mughal India. Agriculture was the most important source of economy even during this time period. As we see in most ancient cultures, agriculture is considered as a very important occupation for majority of the population. It was the case during this time period as well. The Mughal Empire was divided into different agricultural zones where crops such as rice, wheat, millet were grown. And not just the food crops, but we also see many cash crops were also being grown. Sugar cane, coffee, opium, and even tobacco was cultivated. Apart from this, we also see in the fertile regions that vegetables and fruits were also grown. Agriculture was at its peak during this time period, and it made Indian economy as the second largest economy in the world at that point of time. Now, Mughals are known for their good administration. One aspect of this was their land revenue system. This was known as the Shala, or the 10-yearly settlement. This was introduced by Raja Todarmal, who worked in the court of Akbar. Under this system, we see that instead of having the same price for revenue, it was calculated over a period of 10 years. Why did this happen? Because we see that due to lack of rainfall or excess of rainfall, in some years the crop is destroyed. And this is why the average income of farmers over a period of 10 years was calculated instead of forcing them to pay the tax in that particular year. Right? So because the farmer's income was inconsistent, in some years it was a good yield, in another year it was a bad harvest. So according to that, they came up with this system so that it could be fair to the farmer. This system of revenue collection was called the Zabt system, under which 1/3 of the average produce was the share of the state. Now, the peasants were also given the option of paying this revenue in cash or in kind. So sometimes when the peasant is not able to pay in terms of money, that peasant could pay in kind, which means either paying through food grains or providing their service to the empire. Akbar was concerned about the peasants' welfare, and that is why we see that peasants were given remission in the land revenue when the crops failed due to droughts or floods. Peasants were also given loans to buy seeds, tools, and animals for their farms. So we see that in whatever way peasants needed any help, the system or the empire provided that help to the peasants. Now, the Mughals also made efforts to study their land. This was done to ensure that a fair amount is collected as revenue from the farmers. Only if the land is fertile that they can ask the peasants to pay a larger amount, but if the land is not fertile, where cultivation is not happening every year, they cannot charge a lot of revenue. So this is why they decided to classify the land according to its fertility. Polaj was the land which was cultivated every year, so they could ask for revenue every year. Then there was Paroti, which was the land which left uncultivated for some time. There was Chachar, which was the land uncultivated for 3 or 4 years, and Banjar was the land which remained uncultivated for 5 or more years. So in this way, we can see that the Mughal emperors, especially Akbar, Jahangir, Shah Jahan, that they were very responsible in the way that they were collecting their revenue. So this classification of land tells us that The Mughals were very much concerned about the rights of the peasants, and they did not want to overcharge the peasants. This system in fact continued till the end of the Mughal Empire in India. So now we conclude this chapter with this topic. We understand that Mughal Empire had a great impact on Indian history. A lot of achievements happened in the fields of trade, in the fields of art, literature, architecture, and the imprints of Mughal Empire still lie with the current generation. So we will meet again in our next video lecture, and thank you so much for watching this one.